Victor, what was your involvement with the bids, with the concept, and what can we expect from the World Cup in the United States? Please.
United States, Canada, and Mexico. So let's start there first, because that is actually that's the biggest part of the story. So the U.S. had bid for a previous World Cup, this one here, and obviously had not been successful. And the planning for 26 as a united bid was actually conceived in 2011. Yeah, at a restaurant in Vancouver, between 3 Canadians, who said that it was time to bid for the Men's World Cup, because we had just won the Women's World Cup bid for 2015 that we hosted in Canada. And so we decided, at that time it was 32 teams, like here. It wasn't 48 yet. And what we decided to do was we figured that maybe the concept of hosting it with another nation, it'd only be done once, but the bid wasn't actually a united bid. What happened was with Japan and Korea in 2002, they had separate bids, and FIFA had decided to put them together in the last minute. So they didn't actually bid for the World Cup together. But we just thought it would be a very Canadian thing to do, to host with other countries. So we approached our friends in the US, who actually said no in the beginning. Yeah. For those of you that already know me, I'm not a very politically correct guy. I just like to tell you how it is. The Mexicans said yes, of course. And so it took us about a year to convince the Americans that you're better off having 75% of the World Cup, like a very good chance of getting it, than having 0% chance of getting the World Cup, as you have already experienced. And they finally convinced them, and so we launched the bid in 2017 as a united bid. I guess using a different football that we're used to in the Americas. I guess you could say I was the quarterback of the bid. But it was really led in terms of the running back who actually did a lot of the legwork was a guy by the name of Carlos Cordero, who was the U.S. president at the time, who did a lot of the legwork along with the other 2 presidents. But Carlos, I have to take my hat off to him, did a lot of the legwork. So that was sort of our strategy. And obviously we won the bid in 2018 in Moscow, just before the last World Cup. And we've been slowly working on things the last 4 years, and obviously on December 19th of this year, right after the final here, it'll turn all the attention will turn to our 3 host nations.
Wow, it's an amazing story. Why did the US say no when you asked first?
It's the US, I guess. I can say that as an honest Canadian and a good neighbor. Some of you can't say that, or else you'll get into some diplomatic problems. But us as Canadians, we're okay with that. It's just, I can understand that from being a nation that has the capabilities of doing it. Obviously, let's be honest. If the U.S. wanted to, could probably host the World Cup in the state of California. If they really wanted to, they have the facilities. Let's be honest. But the reality of a united bid, and I've said this already, I think this probably will be the last World Cup hosted by one nation, just because it's the reality. I think moving forward, not only from an economic standpoint, but also I think it's just the right thing to do. I think in football is to share knowledge, as you guys are doing here, to share ideas, but also to share the wealth. And I think now, as you've seen with 2030, every bid is a joint bid. And I think you'll see that moving forward, because it's just a better way to do it, to share something with your neighbor, to both emotionally profit from it, forget about the money part, and to really raise the bar in terms of the development of football around the world. I think it's a better way to do things. And so I think this will be probably the last World Cup you see by one nation.
Definitely. And as we can see in Qatar, they are using the logo of football unites the world. So it's uniting from the very beginning of the bid. That's a good message too. But you mentioned knowledge, knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing. And the United States has the top universities in the world. And also another course at Ohio is dividing with the FIFA Master #1 in the world ranking of sport business. What is the plan for building up on the knowledge of the building of the World Cup? I mean, is there a series of conferences already planned, or can we help as a FIFA Marshall alumni to organize not only a conference during the World Cup in 2026, but a series of conferences from now on so that we can start discussing how the World Cup can serve better not only the US, Mexico, and Canada, but the whole world? I just thought about that as you were mentioning knowledge here. I mean, do you think we could help as FIFA Marshall alumni in any way towards the World Cup 2026?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the beauty of it. The runway is a little shorter than normal because it's 3.5 years, not 4. But I think we have the opportunity to, as you rightly said, not only being through the infrastructure of education in all 3 countries, but even in the football infrastructure of all 3 countries, to receive and exchange knowledge. And I think I'm not aware of the exact details, but I know that there'll be plans in place to have conferences, not just the A conference, throughout. There's a lot of touch points as well over the next 3.5 years with other events, whether it be confederation events that we have, like Gold Cups and Nations League and our women's championships and all that. I think there's a lot of touch points along the way where this sort of types of event would be very, very advantageous for the sport and for all our stakeholders. And obviously, leaning on the FIFA Masters program, I think it would be obviously a smart thing to do to have that.
You can count on us. Mauro Silva, you played the World Cup in the United States. What can you tell us about it? Because people sometimes don't realize how important football or soccer, if you like, is in the United States. And you played there, you were a champion there. How could you express the feeling of playing football in the United States during a World Cup?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me be here today and participate in this important conference. Pedro, congratulations, and João, congratulations for this event. Thank you for the invitation. I prefer answer the questions in Portuguese or Spanish because my English is not very good, Pedro. I'm sorry, translate for me, please. Pedro, a lembrança que eu tenho dos Estados Unidos da Copa do Mundo foi maravilhosa, né? Da infraestrutura dos times de ganhar a Copa do Mundo. Os Estados Unidos é um país importante para o desenvolvimento do futebol. Eu acho que a Copa do Mundo voltar para os Estados Unidos é bem importante no sentido de você desenvolver o futebol masculino dentro dos Estados Unidos e também trabalhar nesse aspecto de capacitação de profissionais, desenvolvimento de infraestrutura. Eu acho que esse é um aspecto bem importante que a Copa do Mundo ela sempre leva para os países, né? E principalmente essa questão de desenvolver e fortalecer o futebol americano no cenário internacional. Eu acho que seria fundamental para o futebol, ganharia muito com essa participação, esse desenvolvimento dos Estados Unidos e esse crescimento da indústria do futebol nos Estados Unidos.
Vitor, you understood everything in Portuguese, right? Yeah.
No, but it's your natural language. You said it in Italian or Spanish.
No, he said it was wonderful to have played the World Cup in the United States. They have the best infrastructure in the world. The biggest market, so it was wonderful being there and contributing to American soccer to blossom through the World Cup. Which leads me to my next question, which is, back in 1994, right?
Yeah.
It was basically the beginning of MLS, which is now a strong league. Would we look at the joint World Cup in 2026 as a milestone for something bigger to unite even more countries in that fashion? Because when we look at the global space for football, what we feel, and I can tell you as a Brazilian one, is a one-way globalization. So only European clubs, they have markets everywhere in the world. I take the example of Flamengo playing here in Doha, the last club championship, against Liverpool. Flamengo has 40 million of supporters. One of them, Cadu, is here. Only in Brazil, 40 million supporters in Brazil. Liverpool, 150 million supporters, 5 million in the UK, and over 100 around the world. So we do not have a global competition to face clubs playing the Champions League. What if we had a continental competition from Canada to Chile, from the World Cup 2026, marking a new era in football around the world, where clubs can really be, where football can be truly global, right, Jair? So what do you think?
So a little story before I answer your question. So in 1990, I had retired the year before, and so through injury, so I was a guest in 1994 of our head coach at the time for the Canadian national team. And I was on the bench in the game that he played in Edmonton. You remember the score of that game when you played Canada before the World Cup?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the score?
Toronto, no?
You played in Edmonton, and you played Canada before the World Cup.
Yeah.
1-1.
1-1, Toronto.
They tied Canada 1-1. And it was a great story. I had just retired. If I wasn't retired, maybe, but probably not actually. But I was on the bench. And because the coach was a dear friend, and he said, listen, in honor of your, come and sit. So I sat, so I saw him play. So it was really good. Obviously, they were playing Canada. We weren't as good as we are now, who came to the World Cup. But we were decent, and Brazil was favored. And they were a tune-up. And before the game, everybody's warming up. Brazil loose, and obviously probably going to smash Canada by 4 or 5. It didn't happen. And at the beginning of the game, our captain was a guy named Colin Miller, who had played in Scotland. Great guy, funny guy. And he goes up to Dunga, and he says, Camisa, after the game, I'm captain, you're captain. Dunga says, yeah, no problem. So we tie 1-1. Brazil's not happy because last game before preparation, you tie a country like Canada, you're the favorite to win the World Cup. So Colin goes up to Dunga and says, hey, Camisa, like we talked. Dunga goes, fuck you.
No more chance.
Colin Miller says, that's the last chance you get to ever having a Colin Miller jersey. So that's a funny story. So yeah, and then you won the World Cup. So there you go.
I remember.
Yes. Yeah.
I played.
But yeah, no. Listen, I think the impetus, and I think the impetus of having a Club World Cup that's expanded, that FIFA has. It's already been an agreement by all the confederations and the FIFA Council that there will be an expanded Club World Cup starting in 2025. And the whole impetus of that is not just because it's a competition and all that. It's really the premise of increasing, club football throughout the world. Right now, the base of the power of club football is in Europe for obvious reasons. But that power and the base of that power is really, if you look at it, it's only European in geographical terms, not in terms of assets. The assets are, the players come from all over the world, South Americans, Africans, Asians, North Americans, coaches come from all over the world, and even now ownership groups, right? So 13 or 14 out of the 20 EPL owners are American. So as you can see, it's a it's a really it's the globalization of the game. That now needs to spread throughout the game, throughout the world, not just concentrated in one region of the world. And I think that's sort of the next evolution of club football. One of the best ways to do it is through competitions, whether it's at the FIFA level or confederation level, to raise the bar. There's also, I know, investment in obviously our part of the world. Also, I know in South America. I know a lot of Brazilian clubs are now being, there's a lot of equity being put into Brazilian clubs by mainly US money. And so that, I think, will lead to sort of the improvement of club football from an infrastructure standpoint, professionalization standpoint, and obviously from a development standpoint. And so I think it's very important that, at the end of the day, as we see here with the World Cup and the great fans from all over the world, the game is global. Yes, you have, beautiful football played by countries like Brazil, and you have your favorites and your powerhouses like in any sport, but this is really a global game. And I think from a FIFA perspective and also from a confederation perspective, it's our fiduciary duty to ensure that there is a redistribution of wealth. And what I mean by wealth is not just money. I mean the redistribution of knowledge, wealth, all that is done on a global level. Because at the end of the day, the young boy and the young girl, whether they're standing in Zimbabwe or standing in Germany, deserves the same opportunity, the same right to have those aspirations and those dreams. And so that's our job and your job as you move on into your careers, and ensuring that we keep pushing the envelope on ensuring that globalization is done in a very responsible manner.
Wow, very inspirational, because it's true. We, as a professional in football, should be looking at it, not just in small parts of the business. Mauro Silva is now the Vice President of the Football Federation of São Paulo. And for some of those of you that do not know São Paulo is bigger than Argentina in GDP, population, and almost size. But GDP for sure, and size, and population too. Why? Because Jair Bertoni is the Argentina in the room. By the way, Argentina played in this stadium the last match, the previous match. Congratulations, yeah. Anyway, Mauro, you played for La Coruña for many years. You had to go to Europe to keep playing at the highest level. And now you are running Football Federation in São Paulo with the challenge of increasing the power of the clubs to keep and form more players there. And by the way, Vitor, when you mention the global stage of the World Cup, we can see with Brazil so many people who are not Brazilians cheering for Brazil. But that's only with the national team. Our clubs, they cannot cross the barriers of Brazil because we don't have really a continental competition to face the Champions League that Mauro Silva played. So, Mauro, you played there. You are an idol in La Coruña, and now you have the responsibility of doing something for a state federation in Brazil. What do you do? What is your plan?
Pedro, translate me, please. Eu acredito muito que o importante é o desenvolvimento da indústria do futebol no Brasil, da mesma forma que aconteceu na Europa. A profissionalização, a qualificação de todos os profissionais. E eu sempre digo, Pedro, isso muitas vezes, que o Brasil ganhou 5 Copas do Mundo porque nós éramos muito bons dentro de campo. Fora de campo, na administração, na transparência, na governança, a gente tem um caminho para melhorar. Então, agora, se a gente melhora a gestão, melhora a formação, capacita os profissionais, que foi o que a Liga Espanhola fez, a Premier League fez, entendeu, Pedro? O futebol brasileiro tem um potencial muito grande por ser um país continental.
Wow. First, Brazil has won 5 times the World Cup because Brazil is good on the pitch. Outside of the pitch, we have a long way to improve the management of football. And then between brackets, imagine if we were good off the pitch. So, just imagining. Anyway, he also said that Brazil has a huge potential. If we get professionalized as the Premier League, as La Liga, and by the way, you mentioned, Vitor, the investment coming in Brazil now. So we are very late if we look at. We don't have a professional league yet. The clubs are discussing this in Brazil now. We now are receiving these investments of people buying clubs. So Mauro said, once it happens, Brazil might unlock its potential. And by the way, I just remember that the last World Cup in our continent was in Brazil, 2014. So maybe it's a good opportunity to increase this relationship so that Brazil can somehow help with some knowledge and experience from the World Cup. Just so you know, working here in Qatar, there are 350 professionals from the Brazil World Cup 2014, including the deputy CEO of the World Cup, who was here with us this morning and helped securing this venue. So you can look at Brazil as a good partner, not only for the World Cup, but for developing football worldwide. How do you see us in the future working towards this World Cup together, having in mind that we can develop football worldwide from the World Cup in the United States? As you create United States, Mexico, and Canada. I will not make this mistake again.
So in terms of working with whom, though?
Well, first, working with the experience of the previous World Cup in Brazil. Yeah. So how Brazil could be helpful somehow in order to transfer this knowledge and experience.
Yeah, no, I think if you see a lot of international events, not just World Cups, but Olympics is this way, there's always this transfer of knowledge, right? Yes, it's different markets, different realities from a Brazil to a Russia to a Qatar, and now with us, no doubt about it. But in terms of delivery, in terms of some of the more technical areas, I think those are valuable lessons that can be transferred. So I think for sure, there's value in sort of tapping into those resources that people experience back in Brazil, because I also know that those same people also transferred over to Russia and also here as well. So there is valuable assets there to tap into for sure.
Wonderful. We are approaching the end of our panel. I would like to ask if someone at the audience would have any question. It's a unique opportunity. Sika, he's a lawyer he's the CEO of the group of clubs trying to form a league in Brazil. Yeah, interim CEO. But that's the only we have right now. Please.
Thanks. Hello. Good evening. Good afternoon, sorry. I'm kind of lost here. All right, Pedro, yes, I'm actually a lawyer just like Pedro. It's really nice to have you.
I won't hold it against you, don't worry about it.
It's really nice having you here, Victor. It's really a pleasure to meet you. And Mauro Silva, you're a great friend, and it's always an honor to be with you, okay? My question goes for Mauro, but possibly for Victor, actually. Mauro is the probable next president of the Paulista Federation, of the São Paulo State Federation. And at the same time, we are building up a league. And by building up this league, we're going to possibly move our football from one level to the next one. Actually, we can triple our revenues. If we do that, a club like Fortaleza, which is like the 10th club of Brazil in terms of power, can have more money than Boca Juniors. So, and I'll ask Mauro, do you think that our next challengers would be the Americans and Canadian clubs due to this change of actually the management of Brazilian football and the changing of revenues of Brazilian football after the building up of the league? Quer que eu fale em português, Mauro? Basicamente o seguinte, você é o próximo presidente da Federação Paulista, provável. E, ao mesmo tempo, a gente está fazendo uma nova liga que tenha uma tendência a duplicar, triplicar as nossas receitas. E um clube como o Fortaleza pode ter mais receita que o próprio Boca Juniors. A minha pergunta é que se você acha que, no futuro, os nossos competidores serão os americanos, os canadenses, ao invés dos sul-americanos.
Bom, Sica, depois o Pedro traduz aí, por favor. Eu acho que é um assunto que tem que ser trabalhado. A gente vê no Brasil, hoje na América do Sul, o futebol brasileiro ele crescendo muito e gerando muito mais receita do que os outros países sul-americanos, né? Então, eu acredito que a importância da gente tentar trabalhar em conjunto, né, no caso aí a Conmebol, para fortalecer o continente como um todo, porque senão você realmente corre esse risco, né, de o Brasil com a Liga, como você disse, aumentando muito as receitas e cada vez esse abismo crescendo com relação aos nossos países vizinhos, né, sul-americanos. Eu gosto muito, quando fala de futebol, quando você tem uma visão sistêmica, de trabalhar em conjunto, de unir forças, né, para você desenvolver o futebol sul-americano, trabalhar em conjunto com a CONCACAF, com a UEFA, com a FIFA. Eu gosto muito, porque eu acho que fortalece muito o todo, né, essa união, e de você ter essa visão sistêmica, esse diagnóstico, para você conseguir fortalecer o futebol como um todo, porque senão você vai criando esses abismos e essas diferenças, né, apesar da dificuldade desse ponto com relação às economias dos países também, né, Pedro? Não sei se eu consegui te responder, Pedro, para você captar aí e poder traduzir.
Well, first of all, it's true that Brazilian clubs are, I mean, if you look at the last finals of the Libertadores Cup, it's Brazil against Brazil, against Brazil, against Brazil, and this is not good for the competition as a whole. And Mauro is saying that we need to work together to strengthen football as a whole, and look at the ways we can bring others up to the same level of competition. And I mean, about the economy of the countries, that's outstanding. If we look at the GDP of the United States is higher than the whole Europe altogether. And then if we look at the markets we have in our continent, we have Canada, United States, Mexico, and Brazil. So when we have Brazil just isolated from these big markets up there, it doesn't make, I mean, it's not good for Brazil, and maybe it's not good for the rest as well. But I don't know. I mean, I have here the president of CONCACAF. You know better than us. What do you think about it?
No, listen, I mean, if you look at CONCACAF, we have the richest and the poorest country in the world. We have Haiti, unfortunately, and we have the U.S. Those are the realities of a confederation, and you have to work within those. And you have to remember there's different realities, but what you do for one, you must do for the other, knowing full well that others will probably get to a level that others can't. But also, there's some that are even aspirational. You know, I think in the end, I mean, football is not just about, you know, X's and O's. It's not just about revenue. It's also about your will and your political will, no different than the player. At the end of the day, he was a world-class player. He was a world champion, not just because of his ability, but because of his will to get where he needed to get. I also believe that from an administration standpoint. You have to have the will to get better. You know, we've done that at CONCACAF. When I walked in 6 years ago, because of what had happened in my region with, some of the, you can watch it on Netflix if you want, by the way. You know, some of us that walked in the door, literally, we were bankrupt, not just fiscally bankrupt, we were morally bankrupt. So we had to fix a lot of things. And part of that was the will to do that, and the will to, doesn't matter what was in front of you. And I think that's part of it as well, right? And for us, for instance, in our region, even though the US has the biggest GDP and all this kind of stuff, we're still at almost, I wouldn't say the infancy, but we're at the teenage phase of our sport. We're teenagers in North America in terms of our evolutionary scale. Part of that is will. I'm a firm believer that if the MLS, for instance, you mentioned the MLS earlier, if the MLS, and I think they're going to get there slowly, but has done tremendous growth in 25 years. I give credit to the owners and also the commissioner, Don Garber, who maybe is arguably pound for pound the best commissioner in sports in North America, because he's got a tough job to do to try to compete with the NFL, the NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball. You don't have those issues in Europe, and you don't have those issues in South America. You're not competing with anybody because football is king. And so, but with us, if the MLS wakes up tomorrow and decides, has a political will to be the best league in the world with the 32 owners they have, it probably will be, because they do it in every other sport, in every other league. If you're a basketball player, a volleyball player, a golfer, a hockey player, whatever, there's only one place you want to go play, period. So part of that is the political will, right? And I see Brazil no different, quite frankly, right? Yes, there's other issues off the field, as Mauro has said. Can you imagine if you got that right? God, right? So part of that is you have to look at it internally. And so if you can get there, all right, I don't think there's anything that can stop, whether it be a country like the US or be a country like Brazil. The good thing is you already have the product on the pitch.
You mentioned the will, and do you think that the fact that some owners of MLS clubs are the same of NFL and others is holding the MLS back somehow? Because if they have other clubs in other sports, do they privilege these other sports instead of MLS?
I think 20, maybe 15 years ago, I would say that statement probably was true, but in the last 10 years, no. I think if you look at most owners of sports, they have interest in everything. I mean, Christ, in Europe, you got guys that own 3 clubs in 3 different leagues. What's more important to you, Udinese or Watford? I don't know. Ask them, I guess. But that's the reality of the sport moving forward, right? Is equity players, equity groups that have pieces of clubs all over the world, that have pieces of clubs in different sports all over the world, not just in our football, but they could own the NBA team, they could own a highlight team in Miami if those things exist. But so that, I think that's the reality. That's part of the globalization, is equity will find its way. It's not finding its way in football. The days of, one guy owning that club for 40 years and then passing it on to the family, those days are gone. And if you look at, I think next year is their 100-year anniversary of Juventus, that's been owned by one family. I think those days are gone. I think it's going to be equity players, multi-pronged ownership, and that's a reality, I think, moving forward.
Well, time flies when we are enjoying, so we are approaching the end. We are already 5 minutes late, so you want to, please, good.
So I'm on my board of my local club in Milwaukee, right? Youth soccer organization, right? Local coach. We're looking at 26. Is there any plans for legacy in terms of how do you help grow the game at the youth level versus the MLS level? Is there a way that this could be the equivalent of what happened with MLS back in the 90s to really spur the growth of the game?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I think is great about a World Cup, especially when you're hosting it, but even just a World Cup in general, that's an unbelievable opportunity to really light what I call a pilot light in that young athlete. And that's happened a lot. In fact, I think historically both, and I'll use the US and Canada because we have very similar models in terms of participation and, pay to play kind of thing. The registration the year after a World Cup goes through the roof. I don't know if you see that at your club, but I know that overall that's what happens. And I think you hit on an important point. So the 94, the legacy was the MLS. I think as we move forward with 26, each country will have its own legacy. And it's going to be two-pronged. It's going to be, I think, U.S. Soccer will look at their own domestic legacy. And then also from us, from a FIFA standpoint, what we can give back to each jurisdiction in terms of legacy. And so there's different ideas floating around, but I think one of them would be to ensure that the grassroots is hooked onto that for sure at 100%, and how the best legacy is if you can get the discussion and the activation around the kitchen table at a family, I think you've done your job from a legacy standpoint. So that's the goal, whether it's in Milwaukee, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Atlanta, or in Guadalajara. I think that's a goal. So I think it's very important. I know U.S. Soccer has some plans, and I think as we move on to next year, you'll see some of that roll out.
Just to register, we have someone else from Milwaukee here.
Oh, okay, there you go. NBA champions, by the way. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Mauro.
With a Greek player, there you go. Talk about globalization.
Globalization,
right?
yeah. Mauro, any final remark? Tem algum recado aí para o pessoal? Para terminar?
Just thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you and talk about the football industry. Thank you, Pedro.
Obrigado. Vitor, final remarks. What these professionals must do to improve football around the world?
Yeah, listen, I think, you have to, football is great. You have a lot of opportunities. But, as I tell my family at CONCACAF, my staff and what I call my football family, I think at the end of the day, regardless of what area of the business you are in, whether you're in accounting or marketing or player development, that's outside there, the field, your philosophy has to be football first. If your decisions are not based on football first, then it's time to look for another job.
That's the message. Thank you very much. We see you in the United States 2026. Thank you, guys.